Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be building this custom 3.5-inch Cinewhoop. So just some background context for this project. I started this a little while ago at the end of the last school year, so during May and June of 2022, and this was originally a project for my engineering class, but we didn't end up finishing it because we got a stack that was kind of bad. The flight controller worked, but then one of the BECs died, and then the 4-in-1 speed controller had a bad ESC from the factory, so we weren't able to use it, and they didn't have good product support. So as you can see on the screen here, this is the original drone that we had. It wasn't really a typical drone design, so I did revert to this new frame that I'll show you guys in a minute here. But as you can see, the flight stack doesn't work. It was listed as an F405, and then I figured out that it was actually an F7. I spent about 2 days trying to figure out how to flash the board before I realized that it was a different one than they had listed. So there were just a couple issues like that. So now fast forward to the beginning of this new school year, and we got a new ESC board. So this is the HGLRC Zeus 48 amp 4-in-1 ESC. So this thing is definitely a beast. The other one that we had was only like 35 amps, so this one's a lot more powerful. So before I get into more of this build, I'm going to show you guys some specs from the original unboxing that I made of all the components, and then we'll move on to the rest of the build. So starting with the motors here, we have 4 of these iFlight Zinc E Pro 2207 1800 kV motors. So there's 4 of these. And then I also have this duct that I designed for our 3D printed frame. So it kind of just sits between the motor and the actual arm. And then for the camera, we have right here this Runcam Nano 2. This was a pretty good deal too for this build. Nice and small and compact. And then it also did come with one of these 14mm adapters if you need that, if you have a bigger drone and you want to use this smaller camera. And then for propellers, we have these iFlight Nazgul 3.5-inch propellers. This is the original flight controller from the stack that we got before that had the bad ESC. So although we're not using the full stack anymore, that is the same flight controller, so it's an F7, even though it's listed as an F405. And then for the VTX, we have the very well known speedy VTX 800. It's a very good VTX, and it has the really nice heat sink. And then to complement that heatsink, as you can already see, there's one on the back. We have these Speedy Bee lollipop antennas. So in this package they provide 2 antennas, so we have one on the drone and one in here. Alright, so real quick before I show you guys this new drone design, I'm going to explain the original frame design. So this frame had kind of a connected wheelbase, so all the arms were part of the same unit. And there's kind of just a center fuselage almost like section that held all of electronics, and it did look like it was going to work pretty well, especially for protection, but it was just super hard to access the wires, and I guess that's why traditional drone designs are the way they are now, because the sides are open and it's easy to access. But since I had to take out all the electronics anyways to redo some of the wiring for the ESC, I figured I would just redesign it and make it more of a traditional drone design. So that's what we have here now. So instead of just one plate, we have this bottom plate right here, and then all these arms have 2 screws which drive all the way through to the top of this bottom plate. So if you break an arm, you would just take these screws out and then slide the arm out and then put a new one in. And then these holes right here are just so that I can get the smaller M2 screws in for the flight controller, since everything else has like M3s, which is what all these screws are. And then right here we have the VTX holes in the back. There is this top plate that has this heatsink kind of look that I made. So that's going to sit on top, and then we're just going to have some standoffs right here, 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 and here. Now because the ESC is a 30x30, the flight controller is actually going to sit behind it, and so this is going to get some airflow. And that's why everything's sort of spread out, because they're all different sizes. This is 20x20 M3, this is 20x20 M2, and this is 30x30 M3, so that's why they're all in their own spots. So because the flight controller is back here, the camera wires actually aren't long enough. This is the camera right here. So I'm going to have to extend them so that the camera can reach over here. And then I'm going to make some sort of TPU sleeve that will slide over the standoffs, and the camera can mount to that. So right now, my main focus now is to take all these motor wires because they're just kind of loose, and I'm going to solder them onto the ESC board. And then I need to get the power lead in here, which is an XT60. And then I don't think I mentioned, but in terms of receiver setup right here, we're just using this FlySky X6B. Now real quick, because I do this on the other version of the frame, I'm going to show you guys the wiring diagram for the flight controller to the receiver and the flight controller to the VTX. So there's the receiver and the flight controller and the VTX. So I basically just soldered my own plugs onto the flight controller in the same configuration that fits onto the devices, and I made it so that I could plug in the receiver and the VTX. So now that I have kind of caught you guys up with the process, my next step is to solder all the motors back onto the new ESC board. So I'm going to tin all these pads and solder the motors, and then we can get the XT60 on here too, so that we can actually power the ESC board. And I'll come back once that is done, since it's a pretty simple process. Alright, so it is the next day, and I just made all the changes that were necessary to basically make this thing ready to fly. So as you can see, we have the XT60 right here, and then there's actually the capacitor connected to the ESC. And then next we have this camera. So I designed this quick little mount, and so on each side of the drone there's two standoffs. So these are kind of like micro standoffs right here. So I made this little thing that the camera attaches to, and it can pivot. So right there, as you can see, it just slides on, and that's that. You can see the little heat shrink tubes right here. So the original camera wires only came out to here, so I added all this length of wire so it can come back all the way to the flight controller, which is perfectly centered in the quad. Next, in the back, I just created this little wall right here to hold everything in. So it's just this little piece that goes over the standoffs. You slide that on, and there's a little indent for the VTX antenna. Now on the flight controller here, I got lucky because the pins for the flight controller plug right here line up almost perfectly with these ones, except for two of the most important pins. So on the flight controller, the first pin right here is ground and the second one is voltage. But then on the ESC, the first pin is voltage and the second one is ground. So all I did is switch the pin for voltage and ground on the ESC. So now the first pin on the flight controller goes to the second pin, which are both ground. And then the second pin on the flight controller goes to the first pin, which are both voltage. I did power this thing on before I started recording, just to make sure that everything was working properly. So you can hear it arm, so definitely everything's working. We have the flight controller, which is powered on, and you can see it's flashing, and then the receiver is even getting power. And the VTX, we still have to configure that in Betaflight, as well as set up serial RX in Betaflight for the receiver, but at least everything is powered. Alright, so right here you'll see the receiver, and there's the bind buttons. I'm going to hold this down, and then I'm also going to power on the quad with the USB. And then you'll see the lights start flashing, and the rapid pulses mean it's in bind mode. And then you hold the bind button on your transmitter and power it on, and you'll see the receiver is now solid. And then you go to Betaflight right here. You'll want to select serial via UART, and then iBus. Make sure you have the same settings in your transmitter, and then click save. And then you can test it, and as you can see, it works. And then right here we have our switches. So as you can see, I set it up so that the arm switch is aux2, and then I set it up so that the 3-position switch controls all the different modes. So each position on the switch is a different mode, even though it's the same channel. So as you can see, it was a relatively simple setup process in Betaflight. So now we're going to plug it in and make sure it works without being connected to the computer. Alright, so I'm going to arm it. That's working. All the motors are working, which is different than last time because we had the broken ESC, but now they're all spinning. Sounds very clean too. And I'm going to make sure they're spinning the right direction, of course. So this one is spinning out, this one's spinning in, out. So these two need to be flopped because this one is spinning this way and it needs to spin that way. And then this one is spinning out and it needs to spin in. Alright, so I'm plugging in the quad so that we have connection to BL Heli. And I'm going to plug in the battery so that the motors are powered on. So we're in BL Heli right here. And I'm going to read the setup. And then right here you can see the motors are labeled S3 and S4 so that we know that the ones that are backwards are motor 3 and motor 4. So right here we have motor 3, so I'm going to reverse that and flash it. And I'm just going to put the latest 16.7 firmware on it, which is what all the other ones have, and press flash. And you'll see it gets flashed, and then we'll do the same thing for the fourth ESC. So that one's being flashed with the reverse direction. Alright, so now that we did that reversing in BL Heli, let's plug it back in. And then arm it. And let's make sure they're all going the right way. So now all the motors are going in an inward direction, which means we are ready to fly. Alright, so now that this is working, I'm going to put the props on. So this is going to spin inward. This one is going to spin inward, inward, and inward. And now we got to put the prop nuts on. And then the last thing that I have is the top plate right here. And then this whole thing can kind of sit in here. And then we just have 4 screw holes for the standoffs. Alright, so it's about 2 weeks later, and I changed a couple of things. So real quick, from the old stack, the old ESC had a really bad voltage regulator, and basically I think it kept spiking, and I think it actually burnt the old VTX out. Every time I plugged it in, it would just heat up and there was no LED indicators. So I had this TBS Unify Pro Nano, and so I just slapped that in here. It has like the Emax Tiny Hawk 2 sled right here, so I just kind of have it in this little 3D printed holder right there. And then I took one of these MMCX antennas and I converted it to IPX right there, and it actually worked really well. There's tutorials on how to do that. Then I made this like little 20 by 20 hole mount thing right here, and the receiver also sits on top of that. So it's like a mini stack for the VTX and receiver. So that just slides on top like that. And then we have our receiver and VTX. Also, in the last 2 weeks, I actually got help from someone on Discord, and they helped me tune this quad. It's not perfect, but it's very close to perfect. It definitely fixed a lot of oscillations and stuff, so it's gonna fly pretty well. So I'll put the PIDs on the screen, the different settings, just in case you're interested in any of that, so you can see what changed between what the stock settings were and the new ones. And this is my first official test with the VTX working and the new tune. It took me about almost a week to get the VTX working because I didn't know how the VTX menu worked with the LED, because you actually like hold the button down and press it to change settings and stuff, so I had to learn how to do that. But anyway, everything is working now. And then here's a wiring diagram for the TBS Unify Pro Nano to the flight controller. You can kind of see right there. So I have the 2 screws holding the top plate in, and we should be ready to go. So right here, this is our battery. It is the Tattoo 850 mAh 4S battery, 95C. This will probably only give us a couple minutes of flight time, but that's okay. This is more of a proof of concept, so that's what we'll be using. And this is the final product. Completely 3D printed, besides electronics. Okay, let's go. This is acro mode. So it's very stable, as you can see. Now, I'm not really using this as a Cinewhoop yet, but maybe I'll visit the project again and put a GoPro on it. But I'm excited to see that it's flying. This is pretty cool. It is a little sluggish, but that's expected for how heavy it is. It's very saturated in the goggles here. You can probably see that. But yeah, it's very dialed in. I could probably orbit myself here. I'm glad that my makeshift VTX antenna is actually working, because it was the MMCX antenna. I think it's actually a micro UFL now, not IPX. Go over here a little bit. Yeah, range is fine on the VTX, so. As you can see, the battery is draining faster than it normally would because it's a pretty small battery, but it's still holding up okay.
gets some speed. You can hear the air going through the ducts too. Oh my god, I felt that. Lots of airflow. Surprisingly, with the ducts, it actually has some good tendencies in the air. It's not like trying to drop out of the sky. That was my fault. We're starting to get low battery here. Yeah, there's like not really any prop wash, it's just kind of glides. Acro is good. Alright, I'm gonna try one tree run before we call it a flight. Alright, let's go. You know, I'm gonna have some more fun here. It's so controlled that this feels really comfortable going through these trees. Oh, I think my battery just basically died. It just got to a point where the battery kind of gave out, and as you can see, the VTX is starting to cut out. That's kind of it for the battery, so I'll have to pay attention to that closer next time. So the drone's completely fine, and that was overall a really good flight. We did some acro and we tested the prop wash and stuff, and it felt really good. So yeah, I'll probably maybe do another flight video with this thing in the future, maybe with a GoPro, just to have some fun with it. But this is a really fun project overall. Took a little bit longer than I anticipated, but still really fun. So if you enjoyed this project, like the video, subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.